Endless Dungeon closed beta is underway and the full release is just a month away too, and the game surprised me so much that I decided to explore the origins of it, go back to its roots to another roguelike released back in 2014 by Amplitude Studios, Dungeon of the Endless. Both of them feature a very similar base idea, mixing together roguelike, tower defense and hero defense into one package, and even share around 80% of the game's core mechanics, yet they are very different games when you finally get to play both, and one could argue they are also for a very different audience. If you're interested in Endless Dungeon more, I recommend watching my beta preview of it where I go through everything, so I'll assume at least everyone is somewhat familiar with the very basics, and in this video let's focus instead on the origin game Dungeon of the Endless. Dungeon of the Endless immediately surprised me as I started with a massive shift from Endless Dungeon's action combat gameplay and beautiful 3D cartoonish art straight back into retro pixel art and point-and-click adventure style gameplay that my friend Obby pointed out could have been inspired by the popular Faster Than Light, as the vibe and even the gameplay in many ways is very similar. Many mechanics and important gameplay elements remain the same. I still recognize the resources from science, production and food, and how I want to utilize them, and while the turrets and defenses were completely different, the building system also remained very much the same, with perhaps even more freedom than in the newer iteration of this dungeon crawler, though I definitely prefer the towers not having to worry about range and just affect the whole room. Exploration is also very similar. We still travel from room to room hoping to find resources and the path to escape, but researching in time works very differently, as enemies no longer spawn after a period of time, but instead each time you open a room there's a chance for waves to spawn from powered down rooms. A fairly complex algorithm you have to work around, and basically door openings become your timeline and another mechanic you base your actions on. I definitely like the idea of being more careful or even worried about opening more doors than necessary, which I think should be the main source of danger in this type of game rather than just the normal monsters that keep spawning, so Dungeon of the Endless here feels a bit more thought out and even more uniquely designed. Combat on the other hand got fairly simple. I might even call it relaxing, as it's an auto shooter like an idle game, and once you're in the same room with enemies, your character will automatically act on their own. You can only control your movement between rooms, which while still fairly useful to position yourself at doors, it still leaves you pretty defenseless as you can't run around too much and use movement to your advantage while turrets do their job. But your characters still have their own unique action skills you can use, from berserk rage or boosting towers in your room, so there's a fair amount of character play that is vital if you want to survive. So in this section, while there's already a huge difference in target audience in my book, as Endless Dungeon focuses more on action gameplay and character control, Dungeon of the Endless definitely caters towards players who prefer slow tactical and relaxing gameplay, but fortunately I do love both styles. So the general gameplay felt familiar and the goal remained somewhat the same. While I do miss our little crystal bot, our objective is still to scout through an abandoned starship room to room and find an escape elevator where we have to advance. But in this case, the crystal responsible for powering up the station is static, and you have to sacrifice a controlled character in fact to carry it from one room to the next, which is quite a hassle and also brings us to possibly the greatest difference between the two games, and something that even after just playing this oldie for one day, I wish it was an Endless Dungeon, and that's the power system. In Dungeon of the Endless there is an additional very vital resource you need to maintain and use, and it is the dust system. By default, the starship you're exploring is completely powered down and dark, so you cannot build anything anywhere, and each room might have potential danger unless you power them up using your crystal and your rare dust. For every 10 dust you own, that you can randomly gather from exploring and killing monsters, your crystal can fully power a whole room for safety and building generators or turrets, but also to prevent monsters spawning in them, and so dust is another layer of tactical planning you have to consider compared to Endless Dungeon, as here you cannot just willy-nilly run around the station, but you carefully have to plan which room to light up and which one to leave dark, as each dark room potentially acts as an enemy spawner and another direction you have to defend. Whether you're lucky enough to light up most of the floor, or you're left with only a handful of powered rooms, is up to roguelike randomness, and by the end, you can only hope you can somewhat create a safe path towards the exit to carry the crystal without way too much trouble. This mechanic alone adds so much tactical planning, fun and complexity to the gameplay that I really wish it was in Endless Dungeon now, or at least I hope compared to the closed beta, dark rooms are going to have a much greater presence in later levels or difficulties, as I feel having all these dark rooms present and greatly limiting your ability to properly build defenses is exactly what Endless Dungeon is missing currently for a more thrilling experience, even though I already quite enjoy it a lot. Another difference between the two games is their progression style, as Dungeon of the Endless is more of a true roguelike, starting from 0 each attempt, and Endless Dungeon is a roguelite that allows overall account progression with leveling up heroes and weapons that alter your gameplay and help progression somewhat. I personally always preferred roguelites, as the sense of progression is something that keeps me playing games for longer, and if done well can really give you many hours of bonus fun that otherwise you would just skip on after getting bored with the base game, but this is really just subjective in the end. Despite not having progression, in Dungeon of the Endless, I was also pleasantly surprised by the sheer amount of characters you could choose to play, with having over 28 characters available, each of them with their stat distribution, their own active and passive skills, different weapons from melee to pistols or submachine guns, and perhaps completely unique gameplay like the Beastmaster taming monsters. I also really love the idea of hero progression here, as food became an even more important resource for the goal of leveling up your characters mid-run, since that is the only way you can unlock all your passives and active skills, and so the choice between building science, production, or food generators becomes even harder, since all three of them are resources you desperately need. While in the early stages of Endless Dungeon, this competition between resources isn't so apparent yet. It's really one of the coolest parts of the game to level up and learn all the characters and even unlock them permanently by meeting them in your runs and escaping with them, and choosing different heroes truly changes the whole experience as well. After seeing all these different playstyles from being aggressive, turret-based, or even research-based who give you more resources with operating generators, I can't wait to see what heroes will be added in Endless Dungeon, and I hope the 28 characters from here are going to be the goal to match. Now this video isn't a full review or comparison, more of my first impressions, but I would certainly love to explore and talk more about Dungeon of the Endless if there's interest in it, and I also stop failing in the first Starship, as the game is incredibly challenging while fun at the same time. Overall, I'm having a blast with my friend trying to learn the game and progress through it. The retro point-and-click gameplay is oddly addicting if you like these sorts of games, and like I mentioned, the combination of roguelike elements, the countless unique heroes, and the tactical planning of the dust system easily keeps this game fun and challenging for a long time. I could easily see myself put hundreds of hours into this game, and I bet I still wouldn't be fully finished with it, with all the other spaceships available to explore and challenges and heroes to unlock. Playing this Origin game makes me understand at least now some of the criticism towards Endless Dungeon from veterans who are unhappy about some of the simplifications applied to the new game, especially the removal of the dust system, arguably one of the most fun parts of the game, so one can only guess if there's anything planned to fill this void in Endless Dungeon, or was it meant to be a more accessible and action-paced game overall? Time will tell. Before its full release, there's still a whole month left that now I can see I'd love to spend exploring Dungeon of the Endless more and do as much as I can, and as I learn, I will also probably release a couple more videos, maybe some cool attempts, comparisons to Endless Dungeon, some gameplay, and I definitely would love to fully review it once I have enough hours and progress to feel adequate for a fair overlook on the game, as you need quite a lot of hours to be able to review this game and respect all the work that went into making it. All in all, I love both games so far, but I can't help but also hope that some of these more complex mechanics from Dungeon of the Endless will eventually find their way into Endless Dungeon, perhaps in later difficulties or an expansion, so it would have a fun and entertaining entry-level gameplay, but also a very challenging and complex difficulty later that's similar to Dungeon of the Endless. That's it for my first impressions at the moment, time to get back into the grind, but I also like to thank everyone who listened and found this video fun. Like and subscribe if you thought so, and I'll surely be back with some more content for both games as I truly enjoy playing both. Thanks for watching everyone, take care, and I'll see you all the next time.